All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. We're thrilled to be here with you today. Incredibly honored to be part of Games for Change and a really exciting year in partnership with the Tribeca Film Festival. As you guys are about to find out, we are making two announcements here today. One of those announcements is a new game that we're coming out with, and I'm going to ask all of you to multitask right now, pull out your iPads, and download the game, which is Mars Generation 1. And you can multitask while I'm speaking, but not while the rest of the panel is speaking, so do it quickly. You can also play this game this Saturday if you come out to the arcade that's happening this Saturday as part of the Tribeca Family Day that's happening, and you can play that game as well as at the Institute of Play tent, play some games with Institute of Play and the Quest to Learn schools. All right, are you guys ready to collaborate? Okay, good. Good response because we need you. I'm going to lay out for you today what we believe are the two biggest opportunities we have in transforming an industry and an area that we all know needs lots of transformation, which is education today in America. As you are well aware, education has not changed in the last 100 years or so. If you walk into a classroom today, it's very similar to a classroom that you and I went to and that our grandparents went to. But what we're asking our kids to learn, how they're learning, and what we need them prepared to do has changed dramatically. And that's really what we're here today to collaborate around, is how can we work together to make that transformation. So just a few data points to keep in mind as we go through this journey. The first is what we call the engagement crisis, which we feel like is reaching epidemic levels today. Kids start out in preschool entirely engaged in learning, as you can see. Moving into elementary school, 80% of kids saying that they're engaged in education, dropping to 60% in middle school, 40% in high school, and we're left with almost a 30% dropout rate with 8,000 Americans dropping out of school every day today because they're just not engaged in their learning experience. On the other side of the equation, we have something which we all are well aware of, that these same kids are spending hours. It's now almost 98% of kids are playing video games, spending an average of 13 hours a week now playing these video games versus doing 4 hours a week of homework. So what this says to us is we have an incredible opportunity to collaborate and deliver to kids the learning and the engagement that they expect in the choices that they're making outside of the classroom. The second area of opportunity that we have that I really want to focus on and where our second announcement today is coming from is around the forecast of what's happening with learning games. Right now, forecasted, it's apparently a $1.5 billion market, forecasted to be over $2 billion by 2017. But unfortunately, only 17% of those games are making it into the classroom. And what that means is a major inequity challenge that we have, where kids who have access to those tools and access to those devices are still going to get those incredible learning games, and the kids who don't have access are not going to be able to get them in school. And that's where we'll be making our second announcement at the end of this conversation. So really, these two concepts were why GlassLab was created. This question of how do we harness the natural engagement of games with the powerful analytics to really transform learning for today's kids. The founding of GlassLab was actually a founding of separate organizations that are really what we believe the leaders in commercial games and also the leaders in cutting-edge science. So as a project of the Institute of Play, the other collaborators that founded GlassLab include ESA, Electronic Arts, and on the learning side, Pearson and ETS. And we've continued with this collaboration from the support of the Gates and MacArthur Foundation to bring more collaborators to bear. What I'm about to do is introduce Erin Hoffman, who will be walking through a conversation on how we created the game that you've just downloaded from the App Store, and the collaboration that we did with NASA and with the National Writing Project to make this next game come to life. It's a big green one.
Okay, so my name is Erin Hoffman. There we go. And I'm lead game designer at the GlassLab. I've been making games since about 1999, and it's only recently that I've been able to look back at my career and see this terrible aversion that I have to making money, because I tend to, I love things that are new. I want to work on them when they're exciting and when we don't know what we're doing and when it's really hard, and I get kind of bored when we figure them out and they start to become big. And so that's what's brought me to GlassLab. And I'm proud to say, thrilled actually, that it's been a year that I've been at the GlassLab and I'm nowhere near bored yet, which means that we haven't quite figured it out, but I think that we're well on our way. So when we were making our first game, SimCity EDU Pollution Challenge, we kept running into this recurring insight that was really powerful from middle school kids. They told us, I feel like this game makes me feel like my decisions matter. And what they weren't saying was the more powerful piece of that, which is, I don't get to feel powerful very often. And if you think about your own middle school experience, you start to become an aware being who has to ask for permission to go to the bathroom. And so we heard from Genova Chen something similar, which is that what SimCity teaches me is that life is hard. And he was right. SimCity is hard, it's complicated. When you make decisions, they have consequences that you couldn't have foreseen. And it turns out that middle school kids really, really resonated with that because they wanted to be treated as though they were important. We realized that SimCity was giving them something that was powerful just by being what it was, not by trying to be educational, but by reaching to them on this pain level that they had, and we had to find within ourselves. Games are actually really good at that because they intuitively cause you to be obsessed with challenge and to overcome things that are difficult. So we realized we had to connect with our own middle school selves, and so I forced the team to give us pictures. This is the team, actually, when we were in middle school. And it was really painful to look at these pictures because nobody wants to think about that time, and that might be partly why we don't make products that are really that good for middle school kids. And when you think about what it's like to be 12 years old, the world is starting to explode. It's becoming big. You start to become aware of disasters and things that are happening that are terrible in the world. And at the same time, the kids that are around you, maybe your friendships aren't as simple as they used to be, and you're not friends with everybody the way you used to be. Maybe the adults aren't quite as trustworthy as you thought they were. They're not right all the time. They're not like gods. And so the world becomes exciting but overwhelming. And what SimCity was giving these kids was a feeling like, this is really complicated, but I have power over it and I can be successful. So what we wanted to do is really focus in on that. Kids want to feel relevant. They want to connect with things that are real, not just fantastical experiences, but things that actually make them feel more empowered in their real life. And so we knew that we needed to give them things that were real, that were relevant, and yet also say, here's something that's powerful. And when we were thinking about those competencies, we kept coming back to argumentation over and over again. Because if you know how to parse fact from fiction, if you can take this complicated world and filter it into what matters and what doesn't matter to you, and what is valid and what's not valid, then all of a sudden you have power over your world. And so we saw argumentation and reason as this lens that would underlie both scientific thinking and even things like literary analysis, all kinds of ways of parsing truth. And when we looked at how argumentation was being taught, it's very abstract and dialogue-based. I mean, I was very into writing in English when I was a kid, but it's very squishy. It's kind of confusing at times and very abstract in how it's taught. These can be powerful because it's very expressive, but it's hard to get a grip on. And so we wanted to create a mechanical structure, and what you see here is one of our early prototypes of what we called the claim core that would give kids a way to match claim and evidence and then evaluate that evidence according to certain characteristics that would help them look at the world in a mechanical fashion that could be mastered, at least at its foundational level. And then when we were looking for the world that we would put this game in, whenever we bounced ideas off of kids, we were getting this fascination and this sort of electricity when they heard the word Mars. And we realized that Mars hits that middle school point. It's real, but it's fantastic. It's far away. It seems like anything could be possible on Mars, and yet it's right there in the sky, and you know that it's real. We also wanted to give them a feeling that their future was going to be important and different from ours. And it's true that today we have the first generation of middle school kids who might actually see human beings on Mars for the first time in history. So we knew that if we were going to do Mars, we had to go to the best in the business. And so we went to NASA and JPL and collaborated with them on trying to make our environment as real as we could while staying within the fiction that we were going to set this game in 2054, where these kids today might be thinking about their grandchildren being the first generation of middle school kids on Mars. And so we knew that if they had this craving for relevance, we needed to be real. And so it is my incredible pleasure to introduce Babak Firdousi.
So I work on Mars. Not many people can say that. It's pretty exciting. How many of you guys remember the video game Logo? It was like an Apple II kind of game. For those of you guys who don't remember, it was a game that was pretty straightforward. You had this little turtle thing, and you would tell it to go forward and turn 20 degrees and go forward and it would draw lines on the screen. Turns out, fast forward 30 years, it's driving a Mars rover is a lot like that. We actually give commands like go forward 10 meters, turn left 30 degrees, go forward 10 meters. And so that kind of thing began for me. I played a lot of video games as a kid, certainly not as advanced as some of the stuff that is obviously happening today. I played with Legos as a kid. I played SimCity a lot as a kid. I cheated on SimCity a lot as a kid, which you can't do when you're actually doing real engineering tasks. So, lesson learned. But it is kind of amazing to me today where things have come. And as looking kind of at the high school kids today and middle school kids today, there are robotics programs. There's video games that are far more complex than things I even thought of as a kid. And so it's kind of incredible to see this stuff sort of happen. And I think it's an incredible place for kids to get the experiences and kind of explore their sense of imagination and creativity. A lot of games have real physics bases, for example, and you can see how real physics works and crash planets and do things like that, which you can't do in real life. And so that's kind of a fun place. And things like this are another opportunity for kids to get a sense of what the future might be like, but also to explore that future and what's possible. But for me, I think one of the most important things about games is that it kind of opens up kids to this possibility that the future is theirs to control and to let happen. And I think that's one of the things that affected me as a child, was seeing this, I love space. I grew up on space, seeing the shuttle launch and things like that. And it's this amazing intersection of what is both the incredible things that humans can do, and at the same time, what is extremely humbling when you look back on your own planet and see it as a speck in the sky. And here you have a chance now, for kids to play video games and to experience what life would be like in a future that they can actually help create. And one of the things that's really important for me and for a lot of us who work in this field is getting kids to come and be excited about engineering, be excited about that future, be an active part of that future. And I think that's kind of what I find most exciting about this. So, what started as a kind of a love of video games, of course, at some point I kind of devolved and started playing a lot of World of Warcraft, and could have, there were times. But what started as a love of video games and those kinds of things turned into a love of actual engineering and being a part of that. And yesterday, actually, as I flew on the plane here, I was coding my own software and realizing, it's kind of amazing, what as a kid I imagined, or I didn't even imagine, I didn't even know that was entirely possible, what I'm able to be a part of today. And I think that's cool. I can't wait to play this. I can't wait to see what life is going to be like in 2054 on Mars. I'm also really excited to be a part of it. But let me hand it back over to Erin to tell you a little bit more about the game.
I know, right? So oops. Sorry. Okay, is that better? Okay. Yeah, if you guys were on stage with Mohawk Guy, you would freak out too. So the question is, of course, what happened and did it work? And these are some of the things that we heard from kids when we were playtesting. We're still pretty early on. There's a lot that we want to do and still expand this game into, a lot of polish we want to put on. But these are phrases that we were hearing from the kids. And as a game designer, I care about exactly one thing, which is the look in my players' eyes. It's a simple life. And the look that I'm looking for is what you see in this far right-hand picture. I want to see kids leaning over the iPad, fighting over it, pulling it from each other, and really unable to keep their hands to themselves because they're so excited about what's happening on the screen. And that's what these boys were doing. The boy and the girl are much more polite. They're very careful not to touch each other. And they had a very civil discussion over whether the avatar was going to be a boy or a girl, and the girl won that argument handily. So it was exciting to see this. And even more exciting was what we were hearing from teachers. Because when we said the word argumentation to teachers, at first you get this sort of anxious expression, and it would be like, textual analysis, 5-paragraph essay, argumentation. It's still pretty new for them to teach it the way that they are being asked to with the Common Core. But as we were explaining our learning designers' claim and evidence pair structure and our argument scheme approach and how it was going to be fun and it was going to be on Mars, they would sort of relax and lighten up. And when one teacher was looking at the argument of her opponent, just looked at that and said, "Oh, you're going down." And And she was right. Dara was going down. That was when I knew we had something that was really going to be exciting. And so when we're hearing phrases like this, it's like, OMG, KO, yes, boom, and then just wails of despair when they were getting knocked out. And we were just thinking to ourselves, these kids are in English class, and this is what's happening. They're talking about evidence. They're talking about reasoned thinking. And then we did a test at the Tech Museum in San Jose. And we were next to a jet-powered chair that NASA had built that you actually could sit on this chair and it would lift you into the air. It was incredibly loud and incredibly cool, and it was a very competitive environment. But our booth steadily attracted kids, and they stayed there for 20 and 30 minutes at a time. And then this girl walked up. And she was very quiet and very focused on the screen, on what was happening. She didn't really say a lot while she was playing, but I noticed while she was playing our protein mission, which is an argument about what protein should we eat on Mars and what should we grow here, that she started out saying soybeans, and she had equipped her claim, which was pretty normal, and she was outfitting her robot, her Argubot. And then she kept playing and kept gathering evidence, and then she went back into her robot and changed the claim to fish. And I kind of like edged in there. I was like, hey, can you tell me what just happened? And she said, well, I started out thinking soybeans, but then I was looking at all the evidence, and this other claim seemed to be better supported, so I changed my mind. And I kept it cool. I was like, okay, that's great. I'm just going to write this down. Thanks for your opinion. But inside I'm going, yes, that's exactly what we're looking for. And we had actually set out in the very beginning to say, if we can get a kid to change their mind, change their position on something on the basis of evidence, then that's going to be a marker for us giving them something that's really important. And I realized in that moment, too, that I wish I had a teacher there with me, because the teacher could have leaned in and said, okay, that's exactly what you did. Now think about that, and how do you encounter this in your real life? Do you think that people usually make decisions based on evidence? How else do they make the decisions? How do you think you should make your decisions? Because that's where the transfer happens. What we're trying to do is build a tool that creates conversations where kids can experience things directly and then have conversations with their teachers that actually cause them to change their minds and explore. So that's what we want to bottle. And we think that if we can collaborate with learning designers, we can bring together engineers and assessment designers and amazing people from NASA and the National Writing Project together and make games that are genuinely built on competency, because that phenomenon that we saw of I changed my mind based on evidence, we didn't intentionally create. We didn't create a linear experience that would scaffold her directly into making that realization. She did it on her own because the mechanics of the game were directly aligned with the competency and the learning that we wanted to teach. And so if we can do that, and if we can collaborate with all of these amazing people, I think that we can genuinely change the world. And that's what we're out to do. So I'm going to hand it back to Jessica.
Thanks, Erin. So the other area of work that we're thrilled to announce today is an area that crept up on us that wasn't initially part of the concept when we founded GlassLab. It was through you and through all of the developers who were coming to us saying, hey, all that other technology stuff that you have to create to get that game into the classroom, can I just use that so I can focus on the game and make the game better and not have to create all of the other things that are associated with it? So we kept hearing this time and time again and realized that really what we needed to also partner around and to create is a catalyst that allowed it to become much more simple and easy to get these games into the classroom so we can change that number from the 17% going into the classroom into a number that's much more even to be able to ensure that we have equity of access for all kids. So what we're thrilled to announce today is a new set of technology services called GlassLab Game Services that provide two areas for developers wanting to get into the classroom. The first is the power of a learning infrastructure, just all of the classroom creation, the licensing, assignments, et cetera, of what you have to do with a game when you're putting it into the classroom. But secondly, and really where we've spent the majority of our time at GlassLab, is how do you take the powerful, rich data that's coming from gameplay, take those analytics, align to a learning competency, and give transparency to all of the stakeholders, the teachers, the parents, the administrators, and the player themselves on how they're doing against learning progressions. So we are thrilled to announce today that we've chosen our first partner to work on this game with, or the services with, which is Argument Wars. If any of you are familiar with Argument Wars from iCivics and Filament Games, they've had over 22 million plays to date, which is phenomenal. And I had the honor of actually having lunch yesterday with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor at a separate event. and just feel deeply passionate about the work that she's doing and being able to get, again, the data that comes from that game into the hands of the kids, the parents, and the teachers so that they can collaborate on the education journey of these children. For people who want to look to use these services, we are actively looking for beta partners, so please contact Matt. His email address is below, and we would love to start a conversation with you on how we can get your game into classrooms and start making a big difference in this education or entertainment engagement gap that we're seeing today in classrooms across the country. So please follow us, get involved, and if you have any questions for Erin or I, here's our contact information. Thank you. All right. I think do we have time for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I don't know if I can see.
Yeah, I know, it's a little bright. There's a hand in the back.
Yeah. Yep, so the target market that we have is middle school kids because that's where we're really seeing the engagement gap and the fall off happening. As far as the GlassLab game services, those could be used for all ages, but the games that we develop are focused on middle schoolers. Did you want to address the second question on, Erin's had a lot more experience in creating different games for different ages.
I guess I would just say that you really have to go deep into the experience of your player, and so to make a game for a 5-year-old is almost like making a different species of game than making something for a middle school or even for a high school student. So we also, I think one of the big learnings from game design itself from education is that the education world is very aware of the developmental differences between kids of varying ages. So we're learning a kind of precision about that, and I think what we're going to need is just a lot of different products to cover that full range.
I have a question. When I go on the GlassLab website, you refer to something called ethical assessment. Can you explain that a little bit about that?
Yeah, the question was when you go to our website, we refer to something called ethical assessment. I don't think we say ethical, I think we say evidence-based.
You say ethical.
Okay. And that would be a typo. I'm not aware that we say ethico. So it's evidence-based assessment, and it's taking evidence from gameplay, as opposed to kind of a chocolate and broccoli model where you're playing the game and then you get the assessment after the game. The approach we take to assessment is called evidence-based assessment, and it's taking all of the data from the gameplay to support the assessment model. Sure. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how you see the role of competition, I'm thinking specifically of the two boys rapping at the tablet, and is there positive and negative, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The number one request that we get from kids and actually from teachers for Mars Generation 1 is multiplayer. I think kids have a sort of base assumption that if I've got these robots and I'm equipping them, I'm going to get to fight, versus another player. And I think that the nature of argumentation itself is very interactive and multiplayer. So we're looking for ways that we can bridge that. What we're trying to do in order to keep the competition focused on learning, because it can be extremely powerful and motivating, is to provide them with a world, so our world of Mars, where what they're trying to do is solve really important problems. And when you can keep them on the context of, okay, this decision that you're making is very important, and it's important that you both arrive on the same decision through this fairly competitive thing, which is argumentation. So it's a kind of collaborative competition, and I think so far kids really respond to that, and especially when they're playing a game in a school environment, they're there ready to learn, and they're ready to call each other in a very competitive way that's not violent in any way on mistakes in order to really achieve this goal of the right decision, I was right, and I can stand up to any of your critique.
What about those who are wrong?
Well, those who are wrong, their Argobots will be defeated.
And we look at that as a learning opportunity. I mean, it's, again, failure through iteration, and really having that opportunity to relearn. Yes, in the back there.
I think it's really exciting, the responses that you're getting to argumentation and the excitement around it. I'm wondering whether you are doing or whether you're thinking about
Absolutely.
kind of all presented as, you know, facts stand, or how do you judge
Right.
the quality of evidence and what you're thinking along those lines?
Sure. Yeah, and this is where we've gone super deep into the well of Stephen Tolman argumentation and argumentation schemes. So one of the tenets that we had for this project would be that it would be based on learning science and things that had both had assessment science behind them and a lot of learning design. And so what we've shown so far and with the robots and the claim and evidence pair is the first evolution of the robot. The second evolution has to do with critical questions applied to schemes. So you have to learn the right questions to ask depending on the type of argument your opponent is using. And this is actually kind of a Pokemon framework for mastering all the different types of argument, knowing what works against them and the strengths and weaknesses of your own scheme. So it goes deep into that. And then there's also quality of evidence, which we would call evolution 3.
In the red?
How do you manage teacher facilitation on how, like, training them to learn how to use technology in class?
Yes. So the question was, how do we manage teacher facilitation? So all of the games come with professional development surrounding curriculum and lesson plans. And as all of you know, the game is just one element of the overall experience that's included in the classroom. The teacher is really central to embodying the experience and coaching the students through the experience. Yes?
So my question is for OVAC and NASA in general. Like, could you talk a little bit about what the experience was like working with a collaborative group that did games, and then, you know, you coming from a non-gaming, you know, industry?
So it's not me specifically. We have a Mars program office in general that's worked more with these guys, and Michelle Biati and other people like that are more involved than I am.
Yeah, what's interesting about sort of gamification in the government, when you think about who would be gamifying, NASA, Department of Defense, and others kind of jump out as logical choices. There's actually a senior advisor to the president on video games. It was Constance Squire. It's now Mark Delora. And who's actually worked on GlassLab. And one of the things that they did was look around the federal government to see who else had gaming projects. And what they found, they formed a gaming guild, if you will, and it consists of 184 different people across 28 agencies and departments that have already funded existing gamification projects that are underway. And one of the things they're trying to do is sort of rationalize those and share the knowledge across all of those platforms. So NASA's always been on the forefront of understanding gaming and how it can help solve, you know, a lot of larger policy problems, but they're now not alone.
All right, I think we have time for just one more quick question.
It's Earth Day, so I was kind of wondering, while kids are exploring Mars, are they going to have some kind of reference back to things that really go so well on Earth while they're learning?
Yeah, that's a delicate question, and I think it's one of the things that's the most interesting. And we've actually leveraged a bit of the NASA predictive, things that they've said about the year 2054, what will be going on, and actually why we would be on Mars. All of that is related. And one of the things that's been the most fun to me about the notion of sustainability on Mars is this notion of preserving the Mars ecosystem. Once we're up there, we need to actually protect if there might be life, if there might be areas that we don't want to actually dig into. We're not completely sure about our ability to sustainably create a society on Mars. So I think it's all ways in which we use the fantastical environment that's very far away to say the problems are going to be very similar, and you might want to think about them right in your backyard too.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Please reach out to us to collaborate.